For 3,000 years, the Galactic Council had ruled over the stars with absolute authority. They had expanded their influence across thousands of star systems, shaping the fate of countless civilizations. Their power was unquestionable, and their greatest victory, the complete and total erasure of humanity. Or so they believed. Deep within the heart of the Council's central command, a faint alarm echoed through the halls. It was barely noticeable at first, just a small flicker on the vast data screens that monitored every inch of Council-controlled space. Then the flicker grew. An unknown fleet had emerged from deep space, far beyond the edges of any known civilization. The ships were dark, their hulls sleek and ominous, unlike anything recorded in the Council's vast archives. Admiral Vecren, the supreme commander of the Council's military forces, stood in the war chamber, arms folded, watching the incoming fleet with an expression of cold amusement. "A lost species trying to make a name for themselves," he muttered. Councillor Merrick, an elder statesman with centuries of experience, studied the readings carefully. No known transponder codes, no diplomatic contact attempts. He narrowed his eyes. "This doesn't feel like a simple scouting mission." A young officer at the control station suddenly stiffened. His voice trembled. "Yes, sir. We are receiving a transmission." Vecren scoffed. "Finally, let's hear what they have to say." The transmission crackled through the speakers. The language was old, ancient even, yet somehow familiar. The words sent a shiver through the room. "We remember." Silence. Vecren frowned. What kind of nonsense is this? Who are these fools? Merrick, however, had gone pale. His fingers clenched around the edge of the console as a terrifying realization gripped his mind. The language, the structure of the message. Ancient Earth Standard. His voice was barely a whisper. It can't be." Vecren turned sharply. "What? Speak clearly, Counselor." Merrick swallowed hard. "It's them." His hands trembled. "It's the humans." The room erupted into murmurs. Officers exchanged nervous glances, disbelief on their faces. "Impossible." Vecren laughed, but it sounded forced. "Humans were wiped out. We wiped them out. Every record confirms it." Merrick turned to the central screen, his voice cold and distant. "Then explain why a fleet of unknown warships is transmitting a dead language that only one species ever spoke." Vecren opened his mouth to argue, but before he could speak, the alarm blared again. A full fleet had just dropped out of hyperspace. Dozens of ships. No, hundreds. They moved without hesitation, their formation perfect, precise, predatory. The bridge was silent. Every officer, every council leader in the room could feel it. This was not a simple encounter. This was an invasion. Merrick exhaled slowly. 3,000 years. His voice barely held together. "They have returned." Vecren clenched his fists. He wasn't afraid. No, he refused to be. The Council's military was vast, powerful, undefeated. And yet, something about this fleet felt wrong. Something about those words, "We remember," sent a cold dread creeping through his veins. "Send out a warning to all border fleets," he ordered, his voice sharper than before. "Mobilize the armée. If these ghosts have truly returned, we will show them what real power looks like." But deep inside, as he watched the massive fleet of unknown warships advance without fear, he knew it was already too late. The Galactic Council's war room was in chaos. Officers shouted over each other, scrambling to make sense of the impossible. A fleet claiming to be human, emerging from deep space after 3,000 years. Admiral Vecren stood at the center of it all, his jaw clenched as he observed the tactical display. Hundreds of ships, moving in perfect formation, creeping ever closer to Council-controlled space. No hails, no demands, just silent, relentless movement. Councillor Merrick, still pale from the revelation, turned to Vecren. "We must establish communication." "No," Vecren cut him off, eyes locked on the enemy fleet. We don't negotiate with ghosts. We destroy them. Merrick hesitated. And what if they're not ghosts? Vekrin didn't answer. He simply turned to his officers. Prepare the defense fleets. Activate orbital cannons. If they want a fight, we'll give them one. At the edge of Council space, out in the vast emptiness of space, the human fleet advanced without hesitation. Their ships, sleek and dark, barely reflected any light. The Galactic Council's defense fleets had already taken position, weapons charged, engines primed for battle. Commander Lauren of the 37th Imperial Fleet sat aboard his command ship, watching the approaching vessels with a smirk. They think they can intimidate us, he scoffed. A handful of unidentified ships against the might of the Empire. He turned to his officers. Send a warning. Tell them to stand down or be annihilated. A transmission was sent. Silence followed. Lauren frowned. Did they receive the message? Yes, sir. The comms officer hesitated. They just ignored it. Lauren's smirk faded. Ignored. No species ignored an Imperial warning. Then, without warning, the human fleet vanished. Hundreds of ships, blinking out of existence, disappearing from all scanners, all radars. What the? Lauren shot up from his seat. Cloaking? An officer gasped. Impossible. Nothing can cloak an entire fleet that fast. Then the alarm screamed. The human fleet had reappeared, right behind them. Lauren barely had time to react before the first ship exploded. War begins. Back in the Council's war room, the first battle reports arrived. The 37th Imperial Fleet. They're being torn apart. An officer stammered. Vekrin slammed his fists onto the console. How? They outnumber the enemy 5-1. Merrick's eyes darkened. They had 3,000 years to prepare. What if we are the ones who are outmatched? Vekrin growled, his hands trembling. No, the Council had always been in control. They were the dominant force in the galaxy. And yet, here they were, watching their first fleet crumble like dust. From the depths of space, a new transmission arrived. One single sentence. This is only the beginning. Vekrin felt a chill crawl up his spine. Merrick exhaled. The ghosts of the past are no longer ghosts, Admiral. His voice was grim. They are very, very real. And they are here for vengeance. The battlefield was chaos. Wreckage from the 37th Imperial Fleet drifted through the void, torn apart like fragile glass. The Council's defense forces were crumbling. Admiral Vekrin stared at the battle reports in stunned silence. His elite fleet, one of the strongest in the Empire, had been obliterated within minutes. This isn't possible, he whispered. Across the war room, Counselor Merrick's face was pale. We were wrong, he murmured. We thought humanity was gone. We thought we erased them. He swallowed hard. We didn't. A new transmission appeared on the main screen, a message from the human fleet. For the first time, the mysterious attackers spoke. You thought you could erase us. The voice was calm, steady, yet filled with something far more terrifying than rage. Cold certainty. You failed. The ghosts of Earth return. Aboard the human flagship, the HFY Revenant, Grand Marshal Elias Kane stood on the bridge, hands clasped behind his back. Through the massive viewport, he watched the remains of the Imperial fleet burn. Message sent, his comm officer reported. Kane nodded. Good. His voice was calm, controlled. There was no joy in revenge, only duty. Behind him, Commander Aria Voss studied the battlefield. They're still scrambling to understand what's happening, she said. They're afraid. They should be, Kane replied. 3,000 years ago, they wiped out our home. They hunted us to extinction. He turned, facing his officers. But we survived. A ripple of quiet fury spread through the command deck. We rebuilt. We adapted. We waited. Kane's voice was steel. And now we make them pay. A single order flashed across every human warship. Advance. The Council's desperation. In the Council's war room, alarms blared. New reports flooded in. The human fleet was moving deeper into Council space. Fast. They're pushing straight toward our core worlds. An officer shouted, "We need reinforcements." "There are no reinforcements." Another officer cut in. "The fleets closest to them are already destroyed." Admiral Vekran's heart pounded. "Then we stop them before they reach the capital." He turned to his fleet commanders. "Deploy everything we have. If they want war," his hands clenched into fists, "we'll drown them in fire." Merrick, standing nearby, shook his head. "You still don't understand, do you?" Vekran shot him a glare. "What?" Merrick exhaled. "This isn't just war for them." He pointed at the battle reports, at the wreckage of the Council's fleets. "This is judgment." Vekran's jaw tightened. "Then let's see if they can handle the wrath of an empire." The next battle begins. The human fleet continued forward, unchallenged, until now. A massive wall of Council warships appear ahead, stretching across space. Hundreds of dreadnoughts, thousands of cruisers. The full force of the Empire. Inside the UHS Revenant, Arya Voss narrowed her eyes. They finally decided to fight. Kane smiled coldly. "Good." The human ships didn't slow down. They charged. Weapons fired. Explosions erupted across the void. The war for vengeance had truly begun. The void burned. Wreckage from both fleets floated lifelessly, drifting between the battlefield's survivors. The Galactic Council had sent its largest fleet in centuries to stop the human advance. They failed. Admiral Vekran stood on the bridge of his flagship, the ISS Dominion, gripping the railing so tightly his claws dug into the metal. "They're tearing through our lines." A tactical officer shouted, "Their ships are too." The screen flickered as a massive explosion erupted outside the viewport. Another dreadnought gone. Vekran's last hope, his strongest fleet, was crumbling. Humanity's firepower. Aboard the UHS Revenant, Grand Marshal Elias Kane watched the battle unfold. Arya Voss smirked as another enemy ship exploded. "They still think they can stop us." Kane remained silent, his gaze cold and calculating. This wasn't just a battle. This was a reckoning. The Council had wiped Earth from existence 3,000 years ago. Now, humanity returned with weapons beyond anything the Empire had ever seen. "Our losses?" Kane asked. "Minimal," the comms officer replied. "Their fleets are breaking apart." Kane turned back toward the battlefield. The Empire had ruled the galaxy with arrogance. They had thought themselves invincible. They were wrong. "Destroy their command ships." Kane's voice was calm. "No survivors." The Council's desperation. Panic spread through the Council's war room. "They're heading straight for the capital," an officer shouted. Merrick clenched his fists. This wasn't supposed to happen. Another fleet had fallen. The Empire's mightiest warships, once symbols of absolute power, were nothing but burning wreckage. A deep silence filled the chamber. The Galactic Council had no more fleets left. Humanity was coming, and there was nothing left to stop them. The final message. As the last of the Council's warships exploded, the human fleet finally stopped. A single transmission was sent across every channel, one that every world in the Empire would hear. A shadowy figure appeared on the screen. Kane's voice echoed through the galaxy. 3,000 years ago, you tried to erase us." His cold gaze burned through the screen. "You failed." Silence. Then, "Now we decide if you deserve to exist." The message cut off. The Galactic Council held its breath. Would humanity show mercy, or would they erase the Empire the way Earth had been erased? One thing was certain. Judgment was coming. The once mighty Galactic Council chamber was now filled with fear. Leaders of every species sat in silence, their eyes locked onto the massive hologram in the center of the room. The image of Grand Marshal Elias Kane flickered before them, A ghost from history returned to claim vengeance. 3,000 years. Kane's voice was calm, controlled, merciless. That's how long we waited. The chamber shook as distant explosions rocked the planet. Outside, humanity's fleet hung in orbit, weapons locked onto every major city. Chancellor Merrick took a shaky breath. Please, there must be another way. Kane's expression didn't change. Like the way you gave Earth. A heavy silence filled the room. There was no answer. Desperation in the streets. On the streets of the Council's homeworld, chaos reigned. Civilians ran in terror as sirens blared. The sky above them burned. The remains of their once invincible fleets rained down in flaming wreckage. In the shadows, an alien child clutched their mother's hand. Are they going to kill us? The child whispered. The mother had no answer. Humanity had returned as monsters. But could they still be stopped? The Council's final trick. Behind closed doors, Chancellor Merrick whispered to his generals. There is one last option. A weapon. Something ancient. Something dangerous. If they want to play gods, Merrick hissed, then we will unleash hell. A secret message was sent. A signal lost in the chaos of battle. Deep beneath the city, something stirred. A weapon powerful enough to erase a world, just as Earth had been erased. Humanity's ultimatum. Back aboard the HFY Revenant, Area Voss read the latest intel. They're stalling, she said. They're up to something. Elias Kane nodded. Of course they are. He turned toward the display, watching the planet below. For 3,000 years, the Galactic Council had ruled without fear. They had destroyed worlds, wiped out entire civilizations. And now, humanity stood at their doorstep. Kane exhaled. They have 1 hour to surrender. He turned away, voice like steel. After that, we end this. Time was running out. But the Council's secret weapon was about to be unleashed, and no one knew what was coming next. The countdown had begun. On the bridge of the HFY Revenant, Grand Marshal Elias Kane stood still, his cold gaze locked on the planet below. The Galactic Council had 1 hour to surrender, but something felt wrong. Admiral Area Voss scanned the data streams. Sir, I think they're activating something. A warning blared across the ship's systems. Unknown energy surge detected. Kane's fists clenched. What have they done? Buried deep beneath the Council's city, in a hidden underground chamber, ancient machines rumbled to life. Massive reactors hummed with raw power. At the center of the facility, a gigantic dark sphere hovered above a pulsating energy core, the Oblivion Protocol. A desperate Chancellor Merrick stood before the controls, his voice trembling. Are you sure this will work? A scientist hesitated, fear in his eyes. We don't even fully understand it. This weapon was built by the first ones. It doesn't just destroy life. It erases it from existence. Merrick's hands trembled. We have no choice. He slammed his fist onto the activation panel. The sphere shuddered, and then it began to expand. Humanity faces the impossible. On board the HFY Revenant, alarms screamed. Massive gravitational shift detected. Voss shouted. Something's pulling us in. The view screen showed space itself bending around the planet. The Council wasn't just firing a weapon. They were tearing reality apart. Kane gritted his teeth. They'd rather destroy themselves than let us win. The fleet struggled against the pull. Smaller ships vanished instantly, swallowed by the black abyss forming over the Council's capital. But humanity had prepared for everything. Kane turned to his officers. Deploy the Nemesis Protocol. A final ace up their sleeve. The battle wasn't over yet. The Council's shock. Back in the underground chamber, scientists watched in horror as their weapons spun out of control. One of them screamed, "It's consuming too much energy. We can't stop it." Chancellor Merrick's face went pale. What have we done? Above them, the sky ripped apart. And from the darkness, something answered. Something ancient. Something that should have never been awakened. The black abyss over the Council's capital expanded, distorting reality itself. Space twisted, and ships vanished into nothingness, consumed by an ancient force never meant to be awakened. The Galactic Council's greatest weapon, the Oblivion Protocol, was out of control. Chancellor Merrick stood frozen, watching the monitors as the energy field began to swallow their own planet. "We were supposed to control it," he whispered in horror. But it was too late. The weapon had defied its creators, and it had noticed humanity. The Nemesis Protocol, humanity's answer. On board the UHS Revenant, Kane's voice was calm but cold. "Execute the Nemesis Protocol." The command was relayed instantly. Across the fleet, hidden compartments opened, revealing weapons that defied logic itself. These weren't just human creations. They were forged from the ruins of forgotten alien empires. Admiral Aria Voss narrowed her eyes. "Let's show them what we've been hiding." From the fleet, beams of light lanced toward the expanding abyss. Anti-reality disruptors, designed not to destroy, but to contain. The Council's own weapon was being turned against them. The fall of the Council. The ground trembled beneath Chancellor Merrick's feet. Buildings crumbled. The sky was ripped apart. A scientist screamed, "The anomaly is collapsing." Merrick turned to run, only to see a massive human dropship descending through the chaos. Armored figures emerged, their glowing visors locked onto the Council's last survivors. A voice echoed through the ruined chamber. "Your rule is over." Merrick looked up and saw Kane standing before him. Eyes filled with fury, but also judgment. "You erased Earth," Kane said, voice steady. "Now, the galaxy will erase you." A single gesture, and the storm consumed the Council's last stronghold. The aftermath. Humanity ascends. The battle was over. The Galactic Council was gone. Their last desperate weapon had backfired, turning their homeworld into a dead zone, a warning for the future. Above the ruined world, the human fleet stood victorious. Admiral Voss turned to Kane. "What now?" Kane gazed at the stars. This was never about revenge. His voice was firm. This was a message, a warning to the entire galaxy. Humanity does not forget. And now, the stars belong to them.